In Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, Count Dracula looks very different from the suave gentleman we're used to seeing on screen. He's introduced as a tall old man, clean-shaven, save for a long white moustache, and clad in black from head to foot, without a single speck of colour about him anywhere. He has a high forehead, curly hair, and enormous bushy eyebrows. Mostly, he's described in terms of his unnatural pallor, his sharp teeth, and his uncanny strength. The only time Dracula wears a cloak is when he climbs up the wall of his castle, giving him a bat-like silhouette. Since Bram Stoker mostly describes Count Dracula in terms of his unusual face and physicality, we can assume his clothes are unremarkable to the book's Victorian narrator, Jonathan Harker. The Count presumably wears a plain black suit, resembling other wealthy 19th century men. So why does Dracula's most iconic costume involve a dramatic, red-lined cape? Hi there, I'm GAVIA BAKER-WHITELAW, and this is Behind the Seams, exploring the world of costume design. Dracula is one of the most widely adapted novels in history. The first Dracula movie came out in 1921, sadly lost to time. But 1922 saw the release of Nosferatu, an unauthorised Dracula ripoff that influenced the vampire genre for decades to come. Nosferatu's vampire is monstrous, with clawed fingernails and rat-like fangs. He wears a black overcoat padded to give him broad, hunched shoulders, perhaps hinting at the folded wings of a bat. But a 1924 stage play would change Dracula's image forever. Edmund Blake played the title role, wearing a pristine tuxedo and a dramatic red-lined opera cloak. He was every inch the gentleman, but the cape also served a practical purpose. He could hide behind it while disappearing through a trapdoor on stage. 19th and early 20th century theatre was full of special effects like this, adding a sense of magic and mystery.
I am Dracula.
In 1927, Hungarian actor Bela Lugosi took over the role, and for many people he's still the definitive Count Dracula. Already an established actor in Europe, Bela Lugosi fled Hungary in 1919, endangered due to his anti-fascist pro-union politics. Emigrating to the United States, he worked as a labourer before returning to the stage, landing his first Broadway role in 1922. He then carved out a niche as an exotic foreign villain in silent films, setting the scene for his eventual role as Dracula. After taking Broadway by storm with his menacing charisma, he was cast in the 1931 movie adaptation, which became a colossal hit. This led Lugosi to be further typecast as a villain, returning several times to his most famous role. When he passed away in 1956, he was actually buried in one of his Dracula capes. Now, you may already be wondering about Dracula's colour scheme. The 1931 movie is in black and white, so the lining of Bela Lugosi's cape looks grey. When one of his later Dracula capes sold at auction, the costume itself had a salmon-coloured lining. However, some of the 1931 film's publicity photos were colourised to give the cape a red lining, echoing the earlier staged costumes. Later films and images cemented the idea of Dracula having a red-lined cloak, despite the monochrome nature of Bela Lugosi's original outfit. The 1931 movie inspired dozens of films where the Count is depicted in a similar manner, even including Lugosi's smooth, glossy hair. This says a lot about how the source material was altered for modern audiences. In Bram Stoker's novel, Count Dracula is explicitly exoticized as a dangerous Eastern European monster, preying on innocent English women. With their wild hair, feverishly pale skin and red lips, Dracula and his wives are a sexually threatening counterpoint to the respectable marriage between Jonathan and Mina Harker. And in 19th century terms, there's an obvious racist subtext to the way these foreigners bring danger to English shores. Moving away from the original description of Dracula's unusual facial features and wild hair, the 1920s stage adaptation rebranded him as a suave, stylish aristocrat. With Bela Lugosi, Hollywood found a perfect combination of these two elements. He was a sophisticated gentleman with a noticeable accent, retaining the character's foreign roots while allowing Dracula to seem less monstrous and more conventionally attractive. This is the tone we see for most mainstream adaptations, like Christopher Lee's long run of Dracula movies in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And the red-lined cape became his signature costume. In fact, this probably influenced other creators to put their gothic villains in a dramatic cape as well, adding an air of theatrical poise. It's always interesting to see how filmmakers approach such an iconic character. In more comedic or straightforward depictions of Dracula, we're likely to see him wearing the classic Bela Lugosi costume because it's a familiar visual trope. But in more serious and experimental adaptations, filmmakers want to make their own mark. The character design also evolves with modern tastes and trends.
Help me.
The novel is definitely sexy, but Bram Stoker doesn't describe Dracula himself as an attractive man. The idea of a sexy Dracula is a more modern invention. While the book skewed more toward the fear of a dangerous foreign interloper, later adaptations often emphasised Dracula's role as a charismatic aristocrat, an angle with different political undertones and more potential for romance. In turn, this inspired characters like Anne Rice's vampire Lestat. We also see big-budget attempts to bring Dracula back to more authentic origins, the most famous being Dracula Untold and Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola. These films take very different approaches. Originally planned as the start of a new monster movie franchise for Universal Pictures, 2014's Dracula Untold stars Luke Evans in the title role. It's a historical action movie that takes place in 15th century Transylvania, focusing on Dracula's alleged historical inspiration, Vlad the Impaler. It bears little resemblance to traditional depictions of Dracula, but it fits with the 21st century trend for origin stories and gritty action reboots. Meanwhile, Bram Stoker's Dracula is perhaps the most authentic adaptation of the book, although ironically it doesn't match mainstream expectations for the character. With gorgeous costumes by the legendary designer Eiko Ishioka, this film embraced the Victorian setting and the story's theatrical side. When he first meets Jonathan Harker, Gary Oldman's Dracula is a creepy old man with white hair, wearing red robes with no immediately recognisable historical basis. But once he's rejuvenated himself by drinking fresh blood, he begins to look like a healthy middle-aged man with luxuriant hair and a moustache, wearing a Victorian suit and top hat when he travels to London. This is similar to the transformation we see in the novel. This version of Dracula is predatory, but not conventionally attractive, and the Oscar-winning costumes go a long way to make this film stand out from the many adaptations that came before. Harking back to the stylized lighting of 1920s cinema, Bram Stoker's Dracula emphasized the Count's eerie, inhuman shadow. In the wall climbing scene, his red nightdress streams out behind him like some kind of worm, evoking the tone of the novel while differing from other depictions of this iconic moment. Dracula's cape is a great example of how certain images join the pop culture canon. The most famous version of Dracula bears little resemblance to the character in the novel, and there's no narrative explanation for why he's perpetually dressed to go to the opera. But this doesn't really matter. Thanks to prolonged pop culture exposure, we all know what Dracula is meant to look like, even if we have no idea where that image came from in the first place.
And now I'll leave you.
Well, good night.
Thanks for watching Behind the Scenes. What's your favourite screen adaptation of literature's most famous vampire? Please let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this episode, share it with a fellow Dracula fan. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.